Yep.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to talk about mission critical. What is it and why does it matter? And together with me, I have my dear friend Paul Russell from United Kingdom.
Hello.
Paul, great to have you here.
Yeah, great to be here, Per. Welcome to everybody who's going to watch this, who knows Per very well. And I'm here to support him, be his critical friend, and throw in a few suggestions and ideas and a few stories.
Beautiful. And Paul, do you want to introduce yourself? You
Sure.
have been in the ecosystem for quite some time and you are one of the best strategic advisors I have ever met.
Well, that's very kind of you, Per. So very quickly, Per and I met way back when we sat around a big table in Seattle, advising and encouraging and criticizing and supporting Microsoft when we were on their advisory council. And we had many, many years of great conversations where we all learned about each other's skill sets. And I learned a lot about Per's skill set as an entrepreneur and a strategic thinker as well, but also a tough cookie to deal with. And that's probably what Microsoft would say. And I think that's important. That's why we've hit it off, because in the world of technology, as we all probably know, things don't always work. So you do need a little bit of toughness and a bit of pragmatism. So I think that's where Per and I first met. And then my career from then went through to different places, different companies. I worked for Ricoh, the Japanese printer company, where I was CTO for them. And I was on the customer side. I then went back into the corporate IT side in that same role. I then joined IBM for a while and worked with IBM partners, not just Microsoft partners. So I've had my fill of Microsoft partners and IBM partners and a few others in between. But I was also CTO in the construction industry, totally different industry, learned a lot about the subject today, about applications and if they don't work, what does it mean to the business and that pain you feel when you can't deliver service. So I had that. And now the last 3 years, I've been freelancing as a mentor and a coach and helping C-suite understand what's important and what's not. Where should I spend my money or where shouldn't I? And what mistakes can I learn from and how can I improve what I do moving forward? So it's a bit of that kind of career, but all the way along, Per and I have stayed best friends, and I'm really pleased to be here to help you, Per.
Thank you, Paul. And we all come from the infrastructure space, but we all know that it is applications that makes the experience for the companies that are using them. So in your mind, what is a mission critical application and what is not?
I love it because we've kind of grown up with this phrase mission critical. And, I've spent a bit of time recently talking to people about what's your mission as a business. And, I found that people struggle with that. What is my goal here? And it's got nothing to do with technology. It's literally, why am I in business? And people struggle to really articulate it. So I'm always amazed to come back to then talk about mission critical applications because, what is your mission? Because if you don't know your mission, how do you know what's critical and not? So it's common sense, but conventional wisdom says you need to have mission critical applications and therefore you need to protect them. So I think the first thing I've found more recently than ever before is curiosity to find out why people say that what they say is job one. So, if I'm talking to a retail company, what is your mission as a business? Why do you exist? And what you're trying to do is find a hook into their reliance on a piece of code, bit of software. And sometimes you find it's not the application as you thought it was, and it's something else. And you only get that from being really curious and a bit nosy and a bit inquiring with your questions. And if I'm a partner, sometimes we get led by the language and we ask the questions because they've been prescribed to us by someone and we might miss something. So I would say my version of mission critical is, tied into what the business is about and Once I know that, then I can kind of figure out, okay, well, that application is not mission critical. Stop. It's not that important. You're spending money on this that maybe you don't need to, because you know what, if it's not available, your mission is still going ahead. You know, you're still trading, you're still bringing money in. So it's having that very natural common sense language, I think, is really been missing recently, and especially with the advent of AI. I think it's more important than ever to have that human conversation. So you would expect me to say this, Per, because that's what I've been doing for a few years, is forgetting the technology so much and just focusing on the human to human conversation. But you know what? I think if I'm a partner listening to this, it's something I really, really need to make sure I've got.
So a website that is not a web shop might in many cases not be mission critical.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the thing I would say, and I had a conversation with someone the other day about websites and the importance of, it was this conventional wisdom thing. You know, it's conventional wisdom that every company should have a website. And so people will spend a lot of money, a lot of effort working on websites. And you know, if it's not available, it's the end of the world. You know, we've got to make sure it's available. But if they were to take some time to understand their mission and their customers and their market, maybe they'll still be in business. And the truth is, unless you're Amazon or something like that, where you're trading in through your website, it probably is not as mission critical as you led to think. But conventional wisdom has trapped us into believing it is. So we pour a lot of money down that route. And I'm not always convinced that it is so important for some people. Now, of course, that's a generalization. And I think what you're trying to offer through what you do, Per, and I think it's very good, is a way to programmatically figure out which is mission critical and which isn't. And you know, that kind of assessment exercise, you know, I think is super important. I would say, as long as we then apply common sense to this as well and challenge conventional wisdom. It's like every application needs to be backed up. Of course it does. Conventional wisdom says back up your data, which is fine. But maybe we spend too much money and too much complexity in doing that for an application that, if it didn't work, we might not know, because no one rang us up and said, I can't do something. So how mission critical was it? And did it justify the expenditure? And sometimes it's not the case.
Yeah. So an anecdote is that in my past, my company was responsible for Scandinavian Airlines, which is the largest airline in Northern Europe. And we had a bunch of applications that fell under our responsibility. All of them were small, but each and one were mission critical. Like one example is that so that engineers outside Scandinavia would be able to access service manuals. That was mission critical, because if they couldn't access the service manuals, well, no maintenance and no departures. So small applications that the customer paid like peanuts for, but were mission critical and probably not known by the senior management.
Well, I mean, I love that story. In fact, there's a lovely little story that's just popping up in the UK today, and I'm just going to look at my phone because I think it's really relevant to this, Per. Back in the year, in August this year, there was a problem at the air traffic control system for the UK, and hundreds of thousands of people were inconvenienced. And apparently it comes down to a fact that an engineer was unable to reset the system from home. And it appears that this is the quote. It was the password login details of the level 2 engineer could not be readily verified due to the architecture of the system. More than 2,000 flights were cancelled, causing chaos in an overcrowded airport. And it cost somewhere between 75 million and 100 million pounds. So you look at that, and we all know what this means. Password reset. You know, it's like air. It should just be there. Yes. It should just work. We should breathe it in.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but something clearly has gone wrong. Now, I am sure people are sitting there right now looking at this going, mission critical.
Yes.
But which system, who's responsible?
Yes.
It's a mystery. And so, and yet the output was horrendous. People couldn't go on holiday. You know, it was a real problem in the UK, and the knock-on would have been, you know, extensive. And so, you know, we might look at password systems and think, yeah, that's okay. You know, that just works. It's part of Microsoft or Google or someone. Not really our responsibility. But it was that probably caused the problem. Whereas we spend all this money on some other database that we think is really mission critical and has minimal impact. Nobody would know it's not available. And I do think some of the assessment work, you know, especially as we've got more and more complicated in terms of the architectures that we use. And, you know, when you and I first met, you know, the cloud wasn't really a business architecture. It was all servers in data centers that we owned. Yeah. So we had much more control. Cloud then moved around, and now we've had other architectures with AI and Web3 and all these other things. It's hugely more complicated. So mission critical has a new lease of life, I think.
So that leads me to believe that it is important, it is actually crucial for a company to know what applications that are mission critical. Then they can say that we don't care, but it starts with knowing what you got and what the impact might be.
100%. I can remember a story with the British Library. The British Library, I was talking to the CIO, and we're having a similar conversation. You know, the British Library, like most national libraries, will have decades, if not hundreds of years worth of content. And so we had multiple systems that were very archaic, very old. Some of them were no longer supported, but they were mission critical because, you know, they held contents of really important documents. So he had this problem, and I said, how do you manage this kind of estate of complexity and different historical computer platforms? And he said, it's easy. He said, I have a spreadsheet. I call this spreadsheet my legacy load index. And he showed it me. And it was a thing of beauty. It was simple. And he literally would list all the applications, and the mission critical bit would come from, is there anyone left on the planet who knows how to repair it? Is there a partner around who can fix it with spare parts? And he literally had this traffic light thing that he would present to the board once a month. And he would say to them, if this system suddenly stops working for whatever reason, we will never be able to switch it back on again. And he would use that as a way to translate it in a business language to the stakeholders. Because if he tried it the traditional way that you and I have been brought up on, he said they wouldn't understand me. They wouldn't think about the one that's 50 years old that doesn't work. They don't care about that. They care about the modern stuff. Yet it's the 50-year-old system that contains the Doomsday Book or something super historic for Britain that everyone will be screaming if it wasn't available, and it would all point on him as his fault.
So that's a great example of like mission critical can happen even in a library, like where you don't automatically suspect that they have mission critical applications.
I mean, and it goes back to the mission. What is your mission? A library's mission is to be open for the visitors to look at the knowledge and information freely and accessibly, and et cetera. And therefore, what applications allow that to happen? What applications are important, but they're not mission critical? They're there to support us. But do you know what? I've assessed them, and if they're not working, people can still walk in the door. They can still read the content, and it's having that common sense approach, which of course many of us have done for many years. But I wonder whether we've got a little bit lost in our way, and it needs a bit of a rethink. And I think that's what you're trying to suggest is, you know, just revisit it again and have a look at it, because what you thought was mission critical for somebody may not be. And do you know what it all comes down to? And I talked again with someone the other day. You know, when you think of good, what does good look like? Good looks like all of my applications are working, and I have a support desk that's on top of all the calls, and there's no red flags or whatever. You have a way of describing what good
Yeah.
looks like. And then you then say to them, okay, well, what does good enough look like? And that's a different factor. That's saying, well, what would you be satisfied with? And then you might go, well, actually, you know what? I could take a few hits. These systems could stop working. I could have more calls at the help desk. But you know what? I can still provide a good enough service. And the delta between the good and the good enough is really where you need to focus on, and or stop focusing on and say, do you know what? I don't need to worry about that anymore because I've decided I can still function. It will be good enough. Great. That's what we'll do. And that application of common sense would be really welcome, I think, right now. There's a lot of money being spent.
Yeah. And then you end up with identifying a number of applications where you see that if downtime, unavailability exceeds certain number of minutes, hours, or perhaps days, then it starts to hurt your business.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you can think about, is it worth addressing that, finding a way so that downtime is more likely to be less rather than more?
Yeah,
and that's probably where you make your business case. Is it worth
agreed.
investing in
Absolutely.
uptime?
And the thing I would say is a really practical tip I would share with people is this one, which is, you know, imagine, let's go back to the airport example. You know, there's an airport and they look at, you know, let's just say they look at all of the systems that would affect a passenger. Obviously, you've got the systems in the airport, of course. You've got their website to book the flights and everything else. But then you've also got the air traffic control, the thing that controls, you know, the air traffic.
Kind of important.
Absolutely. So you then go, okay. So what you then play is what I call a pre-mortem test, and so that means you go, okay, the busiest day of the year is the 31st of August. The day after, everything went wrong, and you ask yourselves why. And it's not a real thing. It's where you start to simulate and you start to role play and you say, okay, why did nobody go on holiday on the 1st of September, on the 31st of August? What could it have been? And you rationalize and say, well, you know, unlikely. That's unlikely to happen. Or you go, do you know what? There's a real strong risk of that because evidence says that might go wrong. It's unlikely in the case of the password.
Yeah.
They would have thought about that, to be fair. They might have gone, that's never likely to happen. Unless, of course, there are thousands of password resets happening at the same time, in which case they think there's a high likelihood that this could go wrong, as opposed to maybe just once. And I think a lot of tech leaders fail to do this. I think it's overconfidence. They you know, I'm using the best architecture. My stuff's with Amazon or Microsoft. Those guys are really good. I've got great partners, whatever it might be. My confidence is really high because I've spent money and I expect that. And they tend to then lose sight of what their responsibility is, which is, I'm accountable for this. I need to make sure I'm okay. What can I do within my control to make sure I'm okay? And these things don't cost any money. You're literally sitting people in a room going, it's all failed. Why is it all failed? And you literally go around and you get people to go, do you know why it's failed? Because, you know, that red cable, it's frayed. It's been frayed for a while, and, you know, I keep putting tape around it and I need to put my hands up. I think it could be a problem. And it's getting the honesty around the room to say, okay, that's fine. Let's just fix the cable. I made it real simple. I've got a piece of Ethernet cable on my laptop, so I'm a bit like that. I don't trust Wi-Fi.
Yeah, so like pre-mortem sounds much better than doing a post-mortem.
Exactly, and that's the reason, Per. That's the reason.
Yeah,
you know,
I love that.
And I do this quite a bit with people, and it's fascinating. They have grand plans, and they're very excited about a launch of a new app or a new website. And I'm saying, fine, it's the day after you've launched, and it's gone wrong. Why? And people don't like to talk about that. They're like, well, it's not going to go wrong because it's mission critical.
Yes.
And guys, look, it's going to go wrong. So let's just get it out there. Why might it have gone wrong? And then you write it up as your sort of scenario plan to say, okay, the likelihood it will go wrong because air traffic control will have a problem. That's the most likely reason will have a meltdown on the airport system. It's unlikely to be a password reset for an engineer, to be fair. I bet you right now they're rewriting some of these books to say password reset is a big issue because it's cost them £100 million.
Yeah.
And people didn't have a great holiday. So their mission's failed. Their mission was to send people on holiday, and they failed in their mission because the password reset thing happened.
That's right. That's right. A small detail that was neglected.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, and you know, these things exist on another level, I think now. Now we've got, kind of artificial intelligence running through our applications. You know, we've got even more trust that they're all going to be fine. And, you know, Microsoft had one, didn't they, with their AI, went a bit crazy. They would argue it's probably mission critical because it was providing, cognitive services to people. And then it went a bit off the radar, and it was too late. It'd already gone out, and people were really upset with them. So it's going to happen. You know, there's no way you're going to be able to protect it. So being a bit wise, I think, is the best thing that people do. And one of the bits of advice I would give as well, and you and I chatted about our experiences way back, and some of the old stuff still works. And I can remember a little 4-letter acronym that I think Microsoft used, and it was MAPS: M for management, A for availability, P for performance, and S for security. And the idea was that every time you thought about technology, applications, compute power, data, whatever it might be, you played this game about, am I spending too much my money and my focus on making it super secure? And am I taking my eye off the ball about making it available? Or am I, passing management over to a third party, but I don't necessarily know what they would do, whereas I'm super obsessed about performance. I want it to be, sub-0 millisecond. And the idea is you in the middle of the ring. You sit in the middle because you've got all of the 4 corners kind of squared off. And I think that hasn't changed. That advice, I think, is still very valid today. And assessing where you are with those 4 quadrants wouldn't be a bad place to start for me.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Super. Thank you so much, Paul. This was amazing. You really know this, and thank you for explaining to our audience what mission critical is and how to look at it. So thank you very much. And
always good to chat with you.
Always. So stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you, Paul.
Good luck.